So are you ready to dive deep with me today? Because we are going to be talking all about organizational culture change.
Especially when you know an organization's going through some sort of big transformation.
Yeah, and we had this listener send us a research paper
Really, really interesting case study.
about this district organization in Amsterdam called Nieuw-West. And they went through a merger and a restructuring. So
Yeah,
two big things.
back to back.
Yeah, and we're going to explore how their culture adapted.
Yeah.
And I think this might surprise you with just how quickly things can change when an organization goes through something like this.
Well, what's really interesting about this paper is they actually used a method called mindset analysis.
Mindset analysis.
Yeah, to track these cultural shifts.
Okay.
You might be thinking, like, what is mindset analysis?
Yeah.
It's kind of like taking an X-ray of the organization's soul, so to speak.
Okay.
It goes beyond just those surface level changes, and it looks at the deep-seated values that employees hold.
So it's not just about observing behaviors,
Right.
but it's about understanding the why behind the behavior.
The why, exactly. Instead of just like, what are people doing, mindset analysis helps us to understand why are they doing that? What are the core values driving their decisions and their actions?
Okay, I am hooked. I want to hear more.
Right.
So let's set the scene a little bit with some background.
Yeah, let's do it.
Nieuw-West went through a merger back in 2010, and then the researchers took their first cultural snapshot in September 2011.
Right. And at that point, the dominant value that they found was this idea of result orientation.
Okay.
Everyone was like really laser focused on achieving tangible outcomes.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
They're still figuring out this whole merger thing.
They're trying to prove themselves,
Figure.
establish that new identity.
Yeah.
And you know what the researchers called this? A central value line,
Okay.
which is basically this chain reaction of value.
Okay.
So at this point, what they found was efficiency leads to result orientation.
Okay. Which leads to employees feeling good and fulfilled. So
Yeah.
efficiency is kind of like the foundation there. Results were the goal, and then his sense of fulfillment was the reward.
So it's like a recipe for a thriving organizational culture.
It is.
You have efficiency, you got your results.
Sprinkle in some fulfillment.
Yes, exactly.
There you go.
So then fast forward to May 2012,
Oh.
measurement 2.
All right.
Result orientation is still the top value,
Still king.
but there's a new value that's becoming very important too.
A new contender.
Cooperation.
Yeah.
So why the sudden emphasis on teamwork? What happened?
So it seemed like these austerity measures that were imposed on the organization played a key role in this shift.
All right.
Suddenly, resources were tighter.
Okay.
And so collaboration became crucial to achieving those results that everybody wanted.
So it's not just about individual performance anymore. It was
Yeah.
about coming together as a team
Absolutely.
to get through these challenges.
To weather the storm.
Yeah.
And so this shift towards cooperation
Yes.
was reflected in the new central value line.
Yes, it was. So now it was cooperation leads to result orientation, which leads to fulfillment.
Okay, so the emphasis shifted from individual efficiency to collective effort.
Exactly.
And this is where I think this concept of reconstruction comes in. Because the researchers saw that the organization's mindset was becoming more unified around these shared values of cooperation and results.
More collective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's as if the organization was kind of rebuilding itself around this new understanding of, how we succeed in a more challenging environment.
Okay, but just when things were kind of starting to gel a little bit,
Oh boy.
there's a major plot twist.
Here we go.
Don't tell me it was a giant meteor.
Not quite that dramatic, but in May 2012, right after that second measurement, City of Amsterdam announced this huge reform that was going to significantly strip Nieuw-West of a lot of its power and its responsibilities.
Oh, wow. I mean, talk about a game changer.
Huge.
All that hard work to adapt to the merger and the austerity measures, and then bam!
The rug is pulled out.
It's like the rug is pulled out from under them.
Yeah. The researchers called this a critical event.
Yeah, okay.
This moment that just injected this huge dose of uncertainty into the future of the organization.
Well, how did this critical event impact the culture?
Well, for that, we have to jump ahead to measurement 3, which was taken in May 2013.
Okay.
1 year after the announcement of this restructuring.
Okay.
And this is where things get really interesting.
Okay. You got me on the edge of my seat.
All right. So the cultural landscape had completely transformed.
Really?
Yeah. The values that were once front and center, result orientation and cooperation, They had been replaced by a new set of dominant values, performing essential tasks and doing work well.
Wow. So it's like everyone just went into survival mode?
Yeah.
Just focused on what was right in front of them?
Yeah, exactly. All that uncertainty created by the announcement led to this narrowing of focus. And, the central value line now reflected that shift.
Oh, okay.
So performing essential tasks leads to doing work well, which then leads to job satisfaction and fulfillment and feeling good.
Okay, so the desire for fulfillment was still there.
Yeah.
But the pathway had changed.
Big time.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just a subtle tweak.
Okay.
The researchers actually characterize this as a fundamental cultural change.
Wow.
The very core of what drove the organization had been altered.
In a year.
In a year.
It really challenges the notion that cultural change has to be slow and gradual.
It does.
It seems like these huge external events can speed things up quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? There's another layer to this story.
Oh, there is?
So while the organization was shifting towards this more task-focused approach, the researchers also noticed a decline in what they called collectivity.
Okay.
So people were less united in their values.
Huh. So, we talked about Reconstruction a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
The idea that, they were coming together around these shared values.
Unifying.
Yeah, so the restructuring announcement seemed to have the opposite effect.
It did. It led to a process of deconstruction,
Okay.
where that shared sense of purpose started to fragment.
So it's almost like the organization's cultural foundation was cracking
Right.
under the pressure of this big change.
Absolutely.
So what happens next?
Yeah.
Do they fall apart completely?
What happens to Nieuw-West?
Or do they manage to rebuild a sense of unity?
That's a great question. And to understand that, we need to take a look at measurement 4.
Okay.
But first, I think it's important to dig into this idea of deconstruction a little bit.
Yes, let's do that.
What does it actually look like when an organization's cultural foundation starts to crumble?
Okay, on all ears.
So by May 2014, performing essential tasks was still the dominant value, but that central value line, that clear path from action to reward,
Yeah.
it had vanished.
Really? So it's not just that the values changed, but like the framework
The framework.
for how those values connected and motivated people.
Yeah, it was broken. Yeah, the trend of deconstruction was in full swing.
Wow.
Instead of like this unified mindset,
Yeah.
the researchers found this fragmented landscape of values.
Okay.
And there was no clear consensus on what drove fulfillment or how the work, contributed to that bigger picture.
So, okay, let's rewind for a sec and connect the dots for our listeners.
Okay.
So we started with this merger.
Right.
Which led to a focus on results. Then we've got those austerity measures that kind of push them towards more cooperation.
Yes.
But then, boom, that restructuring announcement just
Throws everything up in the air.
throws everything up in the air.
Yeah, you got it. And it's fascinating to see how, those external events really map onto these cultural shifts that the researchers are seeing. So the austerity measures that all led to what they call Reconstruction. The organization was unifying around those shared values of, results and cooperation, rebuilding their identity, finding strength in that collective effort.
It's almost like they were building a raft to navigate some choppy waters.
Yeah.
And then, bam, a rogue wave.
A rogue wave comes and knocks them off.
Yeah, that restructuring announcement just totally changes things.
And it triggers this rapid fundamental cultural shift.
Okay.
So that focus on cooperation gives way to this more individualistic, task-oriented approach.
Yeah.
People are grappling with all this uncertainty, trying to make sense of a future that feels really shaky and unpredictable.
And that's where deconstruction comes in.
That's it.
Because, those shared values that were kind of holding everything together, they start to fragment.
Yeah, it's like everyone's scrambling for solid ground.
Yeah.
Just trying to figure out, how do I survive in this new, uncertain landscape?
And that makes me wonder, can cultural change happen before the transformation is fully implemented?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
So are you saying that culture can predict the future?
I don't know about that.
Not quite predict the future, but it can anticipate and adapt to change before it fully takes hold.
Okay.
The researchers believe that the announcement of the restructuring actually triggered this proactive cultural shift.
Wow.
It's as if the culture itself went into preparation mode. It's trying to preemptively cope with these coming changes.
So it's not just a passive bystander. It's an active player in the change process.
It is.
Wow.
I think this case study really challenges our traditional assumptions about how cultural change works.
Mm.
It suggests that culture can be incredibly dynamic and incredibly responsive.
Especially when faced with, these big external pressures.
Absolutely.
So if culture can change this quickly, I mean, what does that mean for leaders who are trying to guide their organizations through a transformation?
It's a great question.
It seems like they can't just focus on the structural changes they need to pay attention to.
It's a cultural piece.
Yeah, all these cultural ripples.
Yeah, you can't just focus on, changing the org chart.
Right.
Leaders really need to be aware that the culture is already adapting
Okay.
and shifting,
Mhm.
even before, any concrete changes have been made.
Right.
They need to anticipate those shifts.
Okay.
They need to understand the anxieties and the uncertainties that are driving them.
Yeah.
And I think communication is key.
Communication is always key.
Always key. You got to be open and honest with your employees throughout the entire process.
Yeah, it's not just about telling people what's changing,
Right.
but acknowledging how those changes make people feel.
That emotional impact.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Help people to, navigate that uncertainty, provide support as they're adapting.
Support is huge.
Huge. And that takes empathy,
Mm-hmm.
active listening, and this willingness to adjust your approach
Yeah.
based on what you're hearing from your team.
This isn't a one-size-fits-all approach.
Absolutely not. Every organization is different.
Right.
Every team is different.
Yeah.
They all have their own unique cultural dynamics at play.
It also makes me wonder about the long-term impact of deconstruction.
Yeah.
So if an organization's cultural foundation fragments like this, can it ever truly recover? Will a new unified culture emerge
Emerge from the rubble.
from the rubble, or will it just be haunted by the ghosts of its past?
It's a great question. And unfortunately, this particular study doesn't give us those answers.
Okay.
The researchers, they only followed Nieuw-West for a few years,
Okay.
but it would be fascinating to see a follow-up study
Yeah.
to really understand how that culture evolved
Yeah.
as the restructuring actually, took hold.
Yeah. I mean, did they manage to rebuild a sense of collectivity?
Right.
Did new shared values emerge?
Yeah, and how did leaders influence that process?
Yeah. All very important questions.
Yeah. This makes me think that cultural change is really an ongoing journey.
It's a journey, not a destination.
It is not a destination.
Okay.
And the way that leaders navigate that journey,
Yeah.
it has a profound impact on the well-being of their organization
Absolutely.
and the success of the organization.
It's so interesting, right? We always talk about organizational change, like flipping a switch, like you just change the structure, change the processes, and boom, you're done.
Like, it's so simple.
Yeah. But, this deep dive is really highlighting the human side of change.
Yeah.
It's really messy, it's emotional, it's unpredictable. And that's the reality,
It is.
how culture actually adapts.
I think what's really striking about this case study is, the resilience
Yeah.
of the people at Nieuw-West. I mean, they went through a merger, austerity measures, a huge restructuring.
Talk about a roller coaster.
It's a lot.
Yeah.
And, they adapted, they kept going, they found ways to make sense of all of it.
It really is inspiring. And
Yeah.
it makes you wonder what happened next.
It does.
Did they eventually move beyond that deconstruction phase?
Right.
Did they rebuild that sense of shared purpose?
Well, those are the million-dollar questions. And unfortunately, this study doesn't give us all those answers.
Yeah.
But it gives us some really valuable insights that we can all take away,
I agree.
whether you're leading a team,
Mm-hmm.
a whole department, an entire organization.
So let's bring it home for our listener.
Okay.
What's the biggest takeaway from this deep dive?
For me, it's the realization that culture isn't static.
Right.
It's not this, monolithic thing.
Yeah, it's not like this fixed.
It's alive. It's breathing.
Yeah.
And it's constantly adapting and responding to, everything that's going on around it.
Yeah, and sometimes that change can happen really fast.
Quickly.
And with a lot of intensity,
Yeah.
especially when there's uncertainty and disruption.
Like with Nieuw-West.
Yeah. I mean, when they announced that restructuring,
It was like an earthquake.
it was like a cultural earthquake.
Yeah, shaking everything up and leading to that, rapid shift in values.
Yeah, and their priorities.
Absolutely. And that kind of brings us to this final thought-provoking question for our listener.
Right.
So if culture can change this quickly, I mean, what does that mean for your organization?
What could happen in your world?
Yeah, what are the critical events that could, trigger those rapid cultural shifts?
And what can you do as a leader, as an individual contributor to kind of understand
To anticipate.
Those shifts, yeah, to anticipate them, to navigate them in a way that's going to support you in the success of your organization.
You know, this case study has shown us that cultural change is rarely neat and tidy.
It's messy.
It's messy, it's unpredictable,
Yeah,
and it's deeply personal.
it is.
But by understanding the dynamics, by being open and honest with each other, or, fostering that sense of empathy and support,
Yeah.
we can help our organizations
And ourselves.
and ourselves to weather those storms of change.
And come out stronger.
Absolutely.
That's a great point to end on.
I think so.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive
It's been a pleasure.
into this, crazy world of organizational culture change.
Always changing.
Always changing.
Fascinating.
We'll be back next week with a brand new deep dive into a whole new world of knowledge. Until then, happy learning.